Think you know what used to grow in American soil? Think again. From forgotten staples to outlawed plants, these 15 crops vanished thanks to blight, politics, and plain bad luck. Here's what really happened. Once the giant of the eastern U.S. forests, the American chestnut Castanea dentata, was a dominant presence, shading the hills from Georgia to Maine, providing lumber, nuts, and ecosystem services. But in the early 1900s, a silent killer arrived, a fungus named chestnut blight, Cryphonectria parasitica. Originally from Asia, the pathogen found its way into North America via imported chestnut stock in nursery trees. Once the blight got a foothold, first detected in the Bronx Zoo in 1904, it spread rapidly through the forests. The trees had little resistance, and by 1940, the American chestnut as a mature canopy-forming species was effectively gone. The consequences were profound. Entire ecosystems shifted, oak and hickory took over, wildlife lost a key food source, and the lumber industry for that species collapsed. The loss of the chestnut reshaped not only forests, but culture and economy. Today, small root sprouts remain and restoration efforts are underway. Researchers are breeding blight-resistant hybrids and exploring gene-introduced versions of the tree. But the era of the chestnut-filled hills with its nuts roasting over open fires and its wood dominating woodlots is gone. Its story is a cautionary tale about how a single disease can wipe out what seems invincible and how the great American forest wasn't immune to global change. Imagine stepping into your backyard and picking tart little currants for jam. That was part of American life in the 1800s. But then, in 1911, the federal government banned the cultivation, sale, and transport of many ribes species such as black currants and gooseberries because they were identified as a key host for white pine blister rust, a fungal disease threatening the white pine timber industry. The reasoning was that the rust fungus needed an alternate host, the ribes, and then infected the five-needled pines, which were highly valuable to industry. By removing ribes, officials hoped to break the life cycle of the fungus. As a result, whole commercial crops of black currants and gooseberries were uprooted. Farmers stopped planting them, nurseries stopped selling them, and many states kept the bans in place. For decades, some states only began to relax restrictions in the 2000s. The cultural impact was huge. A fruit that had been titillating pies, desserts, and jams vanished from store shelves and gardens alike. Americans became unfamiliar with its flavor. Meanwhile, the industry for pine timber kept growing. In recent years, ribes is making a slow resurgence, but the legacy of a century of prohibition remains. The story shows how one insect or fungus can reshape what we grow and lose. For a time, this golden-hulled rice dominated the low country of South Carolina and Georgia. Introduced in the late 17th century by around 1685 from African rice strains, Carolina gold rice was cherished for its grain, its yield in tidal fields, and the wealth it created. At its peak, millions of bushels were produced annually in the 1800s. But after the Civil War, everything shifted. The plantation economy collapsed, enslaved labor was freed, and the expensive, labor-intensive process of tidal rice farming became untenable. On top of that, in 1911, a hurricane devastated the last major commercial crop in the region, and by the time of the Great Depression, the variety was virtually extinct in American fields. The disappearance of Carolina gold wasn't because the rice was bad, far from it. It was due to economic upheaval, environmental vulnerability, and changing agricultural practices. But its absence left a void in cuisine, culture, and heritage. Only in the late 20th century did revival efforts begin, with heritage seed banks and small-scale farmers bringing Carolina gold back into production. Today, you can still find it in niche markets, But the era when marshes were golden with Carolina gold rice and its earnings-powered plantations is long gone. It stands as a reminder that crops are not immune to social and economic change. In eastern Pennsylvania during the 18th and early 19th centuries, German-speaking settlers known as the Pennsylvania Dutch cultivated saffron, Crocus sativus, in their fields. By 1730, saffron production was relatively widespread in that region, and at one point the spice's list price in Philadelphia equaled that of gold. The export market was strong. Spanish colonies in the Caribbean bought American saffron, making the crop commercially viable. But then the ripple effects of war caught up with it. During the War of 1812, many merchant vessels carrying American saffron were destroyed. The Caribbean trade collapsed and the market evaporated. With the export backbone broken, the costly labor of saffron harvest, every flower must be hand-picked, became uneconomic. Producers shifted to other crops. Saffron fields were abandoned or repurposed. Over time, the crop faded from commercial U.S. agriculture and remained only in small home gardens and niche growers in Lancaster County. Today, American saffron cultivation is a tiny fraction of what it once was, and most U.S. saffron comes from imports. The story illustrates how global markets, war, and trade disruptions can wipe out an entire crop industry. In the antebellum South, the finest cotton in the world grew on the Sea Islands and the coastal regions of Georgia and South Carolina. This was Sea Island cotton, known scientifically as Gossypium barbadense, is renowned for its long, staple fibers, silk-like texture, and high value on the world market. But its downfall came in stages. First, the American Civil War ended the plantation labor system on which the crop depended. Then, pests like the boll weevil reached the region after 1918, diseases struck, seed quality declined, and cheaper, shorter staple cotton from upland areas took over the market. By 1930, the elite status of Sea Island cotton had largely vanished in the U.S. Its acreage collapsed, and the industry became niche. What was once luxury fabric became rare. Its decline shows how labor systems, pest invasions, global market shifts, and economics all combine to make a cultivated crop disappear from prominence. Today, Sea Island cotton survives in very small amounts in specialized fabrics, but the large-scale era is gone. It stands as a signal that even the world's most prestigious crop can vanish when conditions change. In the colonial American South, fields of deep green indigo plants once stretched across the low country of South Carolina and Georgia. Their leaves were later fermented, processed, and transformed into a rich, vibrant blue dye. In the 18th century, the crop was so prominent that it was dubbed blue gold. The story begins with Eliza Lucas Pinckney in the 1740s, who experimented on her South Carolina plantation and made indigo a profitable export. At its peak, indigo accounted for a large share of colonial exports, second only to rice in some years. Yet the crop's decline was swift. The end of the American Revolution cut ties to British markets, while the arrival of cheaper synthetic dyes in the 19th century made plant-derived indigo uncompetitive. Plantations that once deployed enslaved labor for the backbreaking work of growing, harvesting, and processing indigo found themselves shifting to cotton or other crops. Fields were abandoned, vats left to rust, and the blue gold vanished from American agricultural prominence. Even though indigo is seeing a tiny revival today as a heritage or artisanal dye crop, the industrial era of American indigo is long gone. It's a story of how once valuable exports can fade when their economic foundations, labor systems, and global technologies change, and how a plant that colored continents for centuries can disappear from our fields and wardrobes. 7. Industrial hemp. For centuries, the fiber-rich plant Cannabis sativa, in its non-intoxicating hemp form, was grown across the United States for rope, canvas, sailcloth, and other essential textiles. During World War II, the U.S. government even ran a campaign, Hemp for Victory. But after the war, the tide turned. Cheap synthetic fibers like nylon and polyester began to replace plant-based ones. The imagery of hemp's relation to marijuana stoked regulatory crackdown. The 1937 Marijuana Tax Act and later the Controlled Substances Act of 1970 virtually banned hemp cultivation in the U.S. despite its industrial non-psychoactive uses. The result, a once widespread crop was reduced to near oblivion. Research momentum, seed varieties, fiber processing infrastructure, all but vanished. Only in the 2010s did hemp begin a slow legal revival under the 2018 Farm Bill and state pilot programs. The disappearance of industrial hemp illustrates how legal classification, public perception, regulation, and technological shifts can extract an entire crop from American agriculture, even when the plant itself remains viable. Imagine walking into a grocery store in the 1950s and seeing pies, desserts, and smoothie bowls made with thick-skinned, aromatic bananas of the cultivar Gros Michel, the banana Americans loved. It was hardy, it shipped well, and it tasted better than today's standard banana. Yet by the late 1950s and early 1960s, Gros Michel began disappearing. A soil-borne fungus, Panama disease, a strain of Fusarium wilt, devastated plantations across Central America. The variety's genetic uniformity made it extraordinarily vulnerable. Exporters responded by switching to a different cultivar, Cavendish banana, which became the dominant banana in the U.S. The flavor was different. The change was hardly noticed by many consumers at the time, but the legacy is profound. What was once the banana of choice is gone. The case of Gros Michel is a reminder that reliance on monoculture, export markets, and vulnerable genetics can lead to the collapse of a crop, even one as common as bananas. In rural America during the 18th and 19th, for centuries, many orchards were planted not primarily for eating apples, but for cider apples. Varieties known as bittersweets or bitter sharps, ideal for fermentation, rich in tannins, and used in communal cider making. However, several forces combined to erase this orchard culture. The temperance movement undermined cider's cultural role. Industrialization changed orchard economics. And when the Prohibition era arrived from 1920 to 1933, many orchards were uprooted or neglected because they were tied to alcohol production, even if the apple trees were still legal in themselves. As a result, the specific apple varieties ideal for hard cider fell out of favor. Orchardists planted sweet dessert apples instead, optimized for shipping, storage, and fresh eating. Today, the specialized cider apple orchards of old are mostly gone. Revival efforts exist, but the mainstream crop is fundamentally different. The story of cider apples is more than agriculture. It's about culture, social change, and how a drink and its raw material can disappear when societies move on. Once a staple cash crop in Midwestern and Southern states, broom corn, a variety of sorghum bicolor grown for its long seed-bearing stalks used in broom making, supported an entire industry. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, fields in Illinois, Kansas, and beyond supplied factories that made brooms from the stiff corn of this sorghum. Yet the mid-20th century brought change. Plastic broom bristles, mechanization, cheaper imports, and declining demand all undercut broom corn production. By the 1970s, U.S. production had plummeted to thousands of tons, and the USDA effectively stopped tracking it. While someone might still grow broom corn for niche or decorative uses, the crop's commercial era has ended. It illustrates how a crop tied to a specific manufactured product can vanish when materials and technologies change. In early U.S. agriculture, flax, also known as Linum usitatissimum, was grown widely for its fiber. The raw material for linen, a sturdy cloth used for shirts, tablecloths, sailcloth, and more. The plant's versatility made it valuable, but over time cotton became king, especially in the South. Then synthetic fibers arrived and linen lost its competitive edge. Mechanization, shifting labor practices, and global sourcing further eroded the domestic flax industry. By the mid-20th century, American flax fields had shrunk dramatically, and much linen cloth was imported or replaced with blends. In the colonial American orchard, the golden yellow fruit of the quince featured alongside apples and pears, used in jellies, preserves, and early American cookery. Yet for all its early prominence, quince gradually retreated. The fruit is naturally hard and tart raw. Processing is necessary to make it palatable. Jams, butters, or jellies, which limited its mass-market appeal. Moreover, quince trees are vulnerable to fire blight and other diseases. Over time, growers opted for apples that could be eaten fresh, shipped, and stored. Quince orchards were neglected, and now the fruit is rarely found in mainstream U.S. markets. While niche growers revive heirloom quince varieties, America's background memory of quince is faint. This crop's disappearance is a quiet one, no dramatic ban or blight, but a gradual fade shaped by taste, convenience, and disease susceptibility. On the islands of Hawaii, the crop of sugarcane once dominated the economy. From the early 19th century through the 20th century, sugar plantations employed thousands, controlled land, water, and politics via the Big Five companies that shaped plantation society. However, by the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the economic logic shifted. Global competition drove down prices while labor and land costs in Hawaii soared, and by 2016, the last commercial sugar mill shut down. The crop that once defined island towns and commerce gradually vanished from large-scale production. What remains now are heritage fields, museum sites, and rum production using heirloom cane, not the vast plantation era. The story of sugarcane in Hawaii underscores how global economics, labor changes, and land values can end an entire era of crop dominance. In South Carolina's Low Country region, the seed of the bene seed, a type of sesame plant brought by enslaved West Africans in the 1700s, once served both as food, oil, and seed in small gardens and local production. Though bene had promise as a cash oil crop in the 18th and 19th centuries, it was overshadowed by rice, indigo, and cotton. The crop was never scaled industrially, and by the 20th century, bene seed production had faded to near obscurity. In recent decades, chefs and heritage seed-savvy farmers have revived bene wafers, heirloom sesame varieties, and local traditions. But the era when bene might have been a significant crop is gone. This is a story of a regional crop, cultural transmission, and neglect rather than outright ban or blight. The plant known as Rubia tinctorum, commonly called madder, has been used for thousands of years to produce red dye from its roots, notably the compound alizarin. In the United States and Europe, madder was once cultivated for textile dyeing. But in the 1870s, the commercial synthetic compound alizarin was developed, which replaced natural madder roots for economic reasons. The shift happened globally and made the natural crop non-competitive. As demand vanished, cultivation petered out. While madder remains of interest to dye enthusiasts and historical textile restorers, the large-scale industry is long gone. This illustrates how a crop can disappear not because it fails in the field, but because a chemical innovation undercuts its value. Want the full stories behind these vanishings and which ones are making comebacks? Smash subscribe, drop a comment with the crop you're most shocked by, and tell me which revival you want to deep dive on next.